Hello, everybody. Thank you for joining us today for Vertica Unify 2021. Today's breakout session is entitled Migrating to Vertica, Strategies and Best Practices. I'm Jeff Healy. I lead marketing at Vertica, and I'll be your host for this breakout session. Joining me are Avi Thakur and Ian Kim from the Vertica Customer Success team. Before we begin, I encourage you to submit questions during the virtual session. You don't have to wait, just enter your questions into the Q&A box on the right-hand side of the screen. There will be a Q&A session at the end of the presentation. We'll answer as many questions as possible during that time. Any questions we don't address, we'll do our best to answer offline. Alternatively, visit the virtual developer lounge to ask additional questions and continue the conversation with our engineers and product experts after the session. And yes, this virtual session is being recorded. Will be available to view on demand this week. We'll send you a notification as soon as it's ready. Please stick around to get the code to gain points to participate in our Analyze to Win competition and win prizes. Now let's get started. Over to you, Avi.
Thanks, Jeff. Hello all, welcome to Unify. Today myself, Abhi Thakur and Ian, working for Customer Success team, will cover some of our recent learnings on database migration to Vertica. We have done several migrations to Vertica using some homegrown scripts along with third-party conversion softwares, and would like to share our experience, hoping it adds value to all our customers looking to migrate into Vertica. So migration has become a more frequent project in this dynamic and new evolving technological world. When working on projects like this, there are some key strategy and best practices to be followed. It is important to choose the right migration strategy, converting the best practices of the source into Vertica's best practice. May not be always needed, but keeping options open for design changes helps take advantage of Vertica database architecture. We need to most importantly time it right with the choice of right tools. And from my personal experience, I would say do not underestimate the migration project. Like any other project, migration has its own key milestones, and this needs to be tracked without any exceptions. Everyone needs to be kept well informed, and not following it could lead into delays and ultimately migration failures. So while everyone tracks this project from left to right, the project is really designed are based on the extreme right, which is the go live. And this one's my favorite because you can ask me why choosing the final date decides the project plan. Well, it does in a huge way. That's driving the strategy. And I will try to discuss more in details further. But apart from that, what's the next game changer is knowing your data in the migration project. And that means we need to have some good insights and some good people who knows where the data resides, how it flows through the ETL process. They help you strategize migration projects much better. And there are always these DBAs and SMEs in projects who carry this immense knowledge gathered over the years. And without these key players, migrations can be extremely challenging going through the documentations of the project initially done. Also, it can be surprising when taking inventory of objects and shared across all the teams, how several teams would skim down the list stating these objects were sitting out there just as backup or some test data. I'm sure everyone likes to keep their own backup, but not as part of migration. Migration is another good time to revisit these archival and data governance policy. So let's look at some of the advantages and disadvantages of the go live strategy, which drives the migration strategy, is choosing a big bang or a phased approach or a parallel run project. It's always desirable to have one big bang date. Why? It has lower cost with shorter implementation window. And after that, no one sees us, no one sees the migration team. The big bang comes with a huge high risk where failure in one module can have cascading effects leading to the complete failed migration. Another most critical component of Big Bang is coordination amongst all the module and business owners, making sure the infrastructure team is well aligned and available and updated with the switchover timelines. While not desirable, but guess what? Most organizations end up to have parallel run product approach. The only disadvantage or con of this approach is the cost, as the data needs to exist on both source and the target Vertica database at the same time. So DBAs needs to maintain both the databases. Business and application owners need to drive or design all their release cycles on both the databases. So parallel production is definitely helpful, as it gives you every module to go live as and when they are ready. Migration of database is not just moving data from one architecture to another. The success is derived when the complete ecosystem around it is migrated or replaced. And to do so, as you can see, Vertica has an architecture-rich ecosystem to support most legacy and new-gen ETL reporting tools while staying on top of the cloud provision storage system. Okay, let's get into the migration. Migration has mainly two parts, the metadata, the definition of the object, and the data itself. Metadata migration, in most cases other than parallel run involving long run release cycles, should be a one-time task only, and metadata can be extracted to files using either the source database tools or any other third-party client tools which you have been using to interact with the source database. Once the data is extracted, the metadata mapping involves table type definitions and column type mapping along with the new size calculations. This is the phase where architectural differences and design decisions needs to happen, making sure that the source data resides well in Vertica. We have tried to document and map the data types from other databases into Vertica, and I would still say there is no unified data type across all databases, given the transformations ETL bring in for some data. This is where having a data SME from all modules of the applications helps in rightly mapping the needed data type and size. Vertica is a MPP architecture, and we need to take advantage of the same. So following some best practices around table conversions is segment all your large fact tables. Whenever possible, avoid sharding of the data into small tables and schemas, as it increases the catalog size when moving from the source into Vertica database. And if not already heard of, flattened tables in Vertica that have columns automatically derived from dimensions table to load and query on. This should sound much like materialized views in other databases. If your source database had partitions definitions, do carry forward the same. If not, look for large fact tables if they can be partitions on date columns. Vertica highly recommends using these date columns to be used for partitions, as it helps with the ILM data modification and query optimizations. Also, Vertica has a feature called hierarchical partition, which helps in adding group expressions to these table definitions, and the data automatically gets rolled up into the hierarchy defined, which is almost like archiving your data. Partitions can help lock contentions during large delete, update, and insert operations. Also, the other benefit of partition is it moves data around swiftly within seconds from your staging table to the base tables. Procedures, functions, and triggers. Migration of procedures as of today can only be done moving the code to Python, Java, or C++, invoking the PL SQL code. And all best practices we discussed when moving metadata needs to be incorporated in this, along with explicit cast of data types to maintain the source precision using the SME brains, I would say. PL RPG SQL stored procedure support is under active development at Vertica, and it should be out soon. Once that is there, you could migrate your procedures directly into Vertica. Functions, not all, but a limited support, and all the ones which are not could be transformed into user-defined functions into Vertica. As of today, there is no support of triggers, and if we absolutely find the need for it, then it has to be baked into the procedures, same as calling from the Python, C++, or Java. Vertica has a rich SDK to provide and write user-defined extensions. I would highly recommend to use those. Defaults of Vertica is not the same as other databases, and having this insight is valuable in migration mapping. And what does that mean? DB names, they transform to schema names in Vertica. A DB name or a DB in another database could have cascading roles on by default, while it is not on in Vertica. Global and local temporary tables in many databases by default preserve rows on commit, while in Vertica we need to explicitly define that. There's a unique feature in Teradata called set tables. And when migrating tables like this, we need to be sure that either the ETL layer takes care of the duplicate value insertions by using distinct or group by, or there is a unique constraint provided on these type of tables across all the possible columns of the table. Also, Vertica has something called external tables and flex tables. I would say this is really, really good to have a quick insight on the data residing in your files. Primary indexes, what does that mean? It does not mean it is a primary key column. It just means you are doing the segmentation of your projections on those primary index columns. Migrating known character sets of strings is easier than moving nulls and empty strings. Sounds strange, but true. Migrating from DB to Teradata and Netezza, these nulls and empty strings will call on logics to be changed in PL/SQL for using trim equal to empty string on character column specifically. As DB2, if you know, it puts equal number of spaces for all the data not inserted into a, let's say, char5 column. The SQL and Vertica order by clause produce different results. The SQL order by clause specifies only ascending or descending sort order, while the Vertica order by clause determines null placements based on the column data type, and more specifically on two, which are integers and characters mixed with date and timestamps. So nulls are first when you deal with integer and date and timestamps, while nulls are last when you deal with character strings and Boolean column data types. If you do not care about null placements in your query that involve analytic computations, or if you know that columns do not contain any null values, there's nothing much to worry about. But if you do have such need, then Vertica chooses the placement that gives fastest performance. And so we need to specify nulls either first or nulls at last in our order by queries. Vertica is a case-sensitive database, and it stores the data exactly the way you specify. Then in create statements or when you store the data, we only ignore the case of the object name when you reference them in queries. When these object name appears as data in system table, you will encounter error if you query them with the equality operator because the case must exactly match to the stored identifier. If you don't know how the identifiers and the data is stored, use the case insensitive operator I like, or migrate the data transforming into upper and replace all your filters and join operators on both left and right side to use upper function, especially in procedures. Vertica supports UTF-8 only, where 8 equals 8-bit. Vertica database server expects to receive all data in UTF-8 as input and output. If you have data that does not meet UTF-8 standard, you can modify the data during the load, or you can transform the data files before loading. Before loading the data from text files, you can use several Linux tools, some as common as file or WC, which reports on multi-byte character or non-UTF-8 character. At the same time, Vertica has an inbuilt function, isUTF-8, to report on the same. And these functions on these columns helps you find that there is no UTF-8 or UTF-8 character, which further cannot be used with something like regex expressions. Some good news, starting Vertica 10.1, you can remove or replace non-UTF-8 characters in text data during the load. The make UTF-8 function removes such characters by default, or maybe you could even replace them with the replacement string. Client drivers automatically convert your data to and from in UTF-8 when sending and receiving data from Vertica database using API calls. Another difference of default from other system here is when using position, split, in-string, substring functions like this, the counting starts with 1 and not 0. Also, report of this multi-byte character set gets you to the size definition where a varchar of 15 might have to change to varchar of 30 in Vertica, as you need 2 bytes to store those extra characters. Hoping I have covered some good insight on the metadata migration. Let's move to the real data. And as stated before, if it's a big bang approach, it's the best. We have no overhead of finding this CDC data. It's one-time initial data load and we are done. Of course, the window is longer, but there is no data being changed at the source. If not, we are in parallel production, and here comes the challenge of CDC. If the source DB has data warehouse CDC columns, then I guess we have much easier task to capture and schedule the jobs to sync this data from source into Vertica. If not, we have a task on hand to identify the CDC and bring the data into Vertica. Some of the approaches which we use in our past migrations was combining the primary key columns with the date columns, finding the hash values, and bringing only the new hash values from source to Vertica. If not, it might call for a complete reload of the tables every day from source to Vertica. We use a combination of homegrown tools versus some established third-party softwares. And I would recommend homegrown tools always, as it is, you develop only what is needed and you don't get into complete big product with a lot of other things around. Choose your third product wisely, and one which most importantly gives you real-time status monitoring. It helps you capture the failures at any layer and resubmit these jobs. Also, it should give you the availability or the features to test and bring back the data validations, as simple as record counts difference from the source and the migrated data. I'm sure everyone's heard of SQL Loader in Oracle, or Fast Export in Teradata, or NZ Load in Netezza. That's copy in Vertica. Copy bulk loads data into Vertica database. By default, copy automatically commits itself and any current transaction except when loading into temporary tables. If copy is terminated or interrupted, Vertica rolls back. By default, copy uses delimited parsers, and you can specify these delimiters or escape characters and how to handle the nulls. Kafka is a great tool to stream data into Vertica. We always find ways to replace the existing ETL with Kafka ingestions. On any node is a parameter available in copy statement, which when chosen to, and if the data is accessible from all the nodes in the cluster, it breaks and chooses a subset of data from all the nodes to load in parallel, improving the load performance into Vertica. External table is an excellent feature available in Vertica where you can query the data without even loading the data into Vertica. So if you have tables which are archived in a structured format in files and you need not very often, once in a while only, you could define them as external tables in Vertica. While we have moved the metadata and data, of course, we need to take care of the other aspects, which is the connection, authentications. Vertica supports all AD, LDAP, hashed algorithm authentications, and data itself is not encrypted at rest in Vertica, while you could have some cloud providers giving you the options to encrypt, and those encryptions are supported. The data access between the nodes in Vertica itself can be encrypted or left aside, as this data is already encoded. Ownership roles. When moving from another database into Vertica, what we have often find is security loopholes in those products or architectures does not get cascaded into Vertica. And so these roles needs to be rewritten or fine-grained based on the requirement of the business. Masked columns, column data like SSN, where you do not want all your user base to be querying are easily accessible, accessing this sensitive information. Vertica provides you masked columns, and it is very well documented to follow and implement the masked columns. FIPS, good news, we have started to support FIPS again from Vertica 10. There is no sensitive information ever stored in Vertica logs, either as part of the query or as part of the login information itself. So be certain of this security aspect. Following the test cycles is the key success to Vertica migration, or any migration, I would say. Perform the migration and do not wait for big modules to be completed. Test as quickly as possible at every smaller stages of the project, which starts with the data type validation, the count checks, some upper and lower function checks, some trim function checks, precision checks. So I would say testing is the key success to the migration project. Okay, I hope I was able to cover some good insights on the migration. And just to recap, always approach migration project with an agile mindset. Why? Because there might be places, or there is definitely places needed to change your existing process to take advantage of the Vertica architecture and its ecosystem. Like I said, use third party or develop your own tools needed as per the need of the migration. But do agree on the data standards when migrating from one database into other database, as following an as-is migration really constrains you, and you might carry forward some of the existing bugs, forcing as a feature as the migration. Of course, not compromising on the business rules, as the data complexity and quality needs to be maintained. So having a data migration strategy based on your final go live is what needs to drive the migration project. And as far as possible, communicate every migration details to all the stakeholders. And like I always said, testing is the key phase of the migration project. I would hand it over here to Ian to take over for the best practices on the operational efficiency. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Abhi. So hello, this is Ian Kim, and thank you for joining for today's session. So we have completed the migration with the best practices introduced by Abhi so far, but we still need to look at before and after the migration for the operational efficiency, because the completion of migration is not the end of it, and we have 10 or 10 plus years to maintain the database with the best shape. So let me quickly introduce you with a few more best practices for this area. And the first thing we need to consider as a best practice would be to choose the Vertica mode right. Vertica provides two flavors of different database mode, and they are traditional enterprise mode, and the second one is cloud-based Eon mode, which are basically developed based on the cloud architecture. So the biggest differences between the two modes is that this Eon gives you more flexibility in adding and removing the nodes in your database cluster, enabling the dynamic scaling out and scaling in so that you can manage the overall capacity of your Vertica cluster. So to make the decision of enterprise mode or Eon mode, we need to determine the type of behavior and workload of end user or end user group very carefully to secure the operational cost optimization. Once we have made choice of our Vertica database mode, then the next thing to do is to choose the right instance type for the mode. As we now understand, the Eon can add or remove nodes very easily. So we can build up some strategies around maintaining the capacity of the Vertica cluster. And one of the most common strategy would be to isolate the ETL workload and BI workload. So for example, you can deploy lower number of nodes, which are with higher number of CPUs for ETL workload. And so that the ETL can be completed within a short amount of time. And then you can choose to deploy the higher number of nodes, which are with a low number of CPUs for your BI workload, building some number of subclusters and turn this subcluster on and off, followed by the user workload demand to take the control of operational efficiency and cost optimization. But one thing we need to take note is that each and every subcluster should be teamed with the same homogeneous nodes, or otherwise the slowest node will drag all the performance of the neighboring nodes in the same subcluster. So I have put in a few URLs here covering the cluster sizing and hardware guide for both modes of Vertica databases. So if you are interested, please refer them later. So now we have reviewed the infrastructure side of the Vertica cluster. So the next is to look inside to the database, and the projection will be the good starting point for us to check with from the beginning. So to Vertica, the table is a logical name, and the data itself is stored inside projections with the characteristics such as encoding, segmentation, sort order, and so on and so forth. So for the optimal projection design, Vertica provides database designer utility. So you can provide this database designer with table names and representative SQL statements for those tables. Then the database designer will do the calculations for you and return the suggested projections so that you can review and create it. Once you're done with the creation of those suggested projections, we wish you don't forget to drop the old projections, as it will show no performance gain with the old projections attached to the tables. And for your information, Database Designer does not consider live aggregation projection. So whenever you think live aggregation projection is going to help you with the performance, just go ahead and add it so that you can enjoy the additional performance gain. For the ETL best practices, I would like to point out 3 bullets from this slide. They are the first one and the second one and the last bullets. So for the first one is to avoid writing create tables and drop table statements to your ETL jobs as much as possible, as it will make the database catalog to grow very fast. Instead, Vertica recommends to use local temporary tables and truncate it after use. And for the second bullet, when you load data, remember to formulate them in your ETL job rather than simply firing tens of thousands of single row insert statements because of the characteristics of the Vertica database as a columnar database. And for the last bullet, when you load large amount of data to your table, and this table has an identity column in it, then please set the cache refill size appropriately. So one of the recent case from a customer is that they want to load 2.5 billions of rows to a table, and it took 2 hours for them. So they came to us for help, and we found that this table is with identity column. So we increased the cache refill size appropriately, and then the load time decreases from 2 hours into 9 minutes. Okay, so for load balance, the load balance we are talking about here is regarding the overhead as the initiator node. Typically, the initiator node has to perform many additional tasks such as user authentication, object verification, query plan building, and sort and grouping the result set returning from the neighboring nodes in your subcluster, and so on and so forth, which is definitely regarded as an overhead. So the idea of the load balancer here is to distribute the opportunity to be an initiator node, to be selected as an initiator node evenly across the nodes in your subcluster. Okay, so if you have a load balancer in your infrastructure, then you can simply choose to use it, or you can still choose to use the Vertica provided native load balancer, which can be configured into 2 modes. And for the first mode is cluster-wide balancing, which will be distribute the initiator node opportunity evenly across your subcluster. And the second mode will be load balancing policies, which will direct user connections to a specific group of nodes in your subcluster, followed by the source IP range. Okay, optimizing query. I understand we have a separate session covering this topic very deeply tomorrow morning in this Unify presentation. So I encourage you to join that session to get more in-depth knowledge, and I'm not going to cover this slide deeply for now, but just wish you to remember 2 table names here. It is DC execution engine event and DC optimizer event. What they does is there will be lots of different types of events for execution engine when it executes a query. So some of them may impact positively to the performance, and some of them may impact negatively. So in case of negative event, this table records suggested actions together with the event name, as you can see from the example here in the slide. So if you can combine your query plan analysis together with these tables, then you can get to know what you can do to tweak the performance more easier. Adjusting BI workload. If your BI solution provides a push-down feature or any similar feature, then please go ahead and use it so that the query and all the analytics can be performed from Vertica database side to maximize the performance and minimize the response time. This will reduce the amount of data flow from database to the BI server drastically, and it will just return the data set just as necessary for the BI server to build up the report. So everything will be performed from database side, and just necessary amount of data will be passed to the BI, and it will be kind of, I would say, idealistic environment for database and BI relations, I would say. For the third bullet, views. There will be lots and lots of views created just for the use of BI. But remember, those views are created to best perform from your previous database. Of course, with migration, most of them will perform just well. And just in case few of them are slow in performance, you can refine those views by reviewing them, such as inline views, unions, functions, and joins, etc., etc. And for the last item, which is materialized view, we strongly recommend you to replace them with our live aggregation projections or top K projections, as it will not only gives you the performance gain, but also gives you with the operational simplicity as well. Tuning resource pool. As many of us may know, that Vertica provides the out-of-the-box resource pool, and also you can create your own design of resource pools, including cascaded resource pools to implement the various strategies to optimize the performance of your database based on the understandings and requirement and knowledges and expectation. But in reality, it could be slightly different from your initial intention or design. So it is always required to go back and confirm that the usage matches the design. And if not, you can change the resource pool configuration to match the usage, or vice versa. It is, I would say, a continuous effort or process, but you don't have to be really alerted to that too much. Let me give you an analogy of you drive your car, I mean your database, to where you want to go with the steering wheel called resource pool. To do that, you keep a good hold on to your steering wheel and continuously adjust the direction to the destination of your own desire, right? And that's how it goes with the resource pool. Same goes with the tuple mover. Tuple mover is a background service that merges multiple small ROS containers into one single bigger ROS containers. This is to reduce the overhead of opening and closing too much files when the database is processing a query for a table. But the tuple mover may perform well or poorly, depends on the situation or usage or characteristics of your database. So to help tuple mover perform better, you can adjust the tuple mover resource pool with the concurrency and memory resources, so that ultimately to help the database to perform well. Okay, now we have done most of the tuning related tasks for the database, and I think it is time for us to monitor the database with Management Console. This Management Console is a web-based tool for administer, monitor, and provision all the nodes of your database. So for DBA, most of the administrative tasks can be done inside this Management Console for both Eon and Enterprise mode. On top of this, you can play with Database Designer, query plan tuning, and manage your resource pool with a graphical user interface and user-friendly environment. And also, needless to say, the whole lot of monitoring features are available, as you can see from the lower side of this slide. And there are plenty of them. And most of the Management Console statistics and graphs and dashboards are based on the data collector table data. So this data collector table is a tabular representation of Vertica logs. I mean, this Vertica log here is not the conventional Vertica.log file and some other TXN logs and other conventional logs. It is a separate stuff, I would say, and we have a separate file set of database logs called the data collector. So if you really want to try to mine this Vertica log to a deeper level, then you can combine these two things, I mean the data collector and conventional logs together if you are comfortable writing queries. So most of the time after customer accomplishes database optimization, tuning, and monitoring, then may wishes to set up an audit for users and user activities. So to get that, data collector is a good point to start to meet your company-specific audit requirement. I cannot emphasize enough the importance of training before, during, and after the migration, not only for your migration staff, but also for the end user group and so on and so forth. You can design lots and lots of different types of training and share them knowledges across the wide variety of groups and roles of people. And Vertica is trying to help these efforts by many tools. So first tools I would say is Vertica Academy, which is a free of charge membership portal that has more than 50 plus self-paced online courses, webinars, and certification. And also, there are many short media clips introduces the features for you to quickly learn new things so that you can enjoy learning about the Vertica database as much as you want. So the strong recommendation from my side would be to join and try this Vertica Academy site at your convenience. And hope you don't forget to enjoy the learning experiences from this Vertica Academy. And for problems, questions, and issues, You can get help from the Vertica support portal and knowledge bases, as you can see the URLs from this slide. And for Vertica Forum, it is a kind of a place for roundtable conversation or like open conversation places, so that you can discuss any subject of your interest or idea, not only with the Vertica staff, but also with your neighboring Vertica customers as well. So the purpose of this Vertica Forum is to add more chances to the customers to cover anything from any customer can be covered. So that's going to be the main purpose. So you can start any conversation of your interest from this Vertica Forum anytime you like. Vertica WeAdvise Report. It is a self-service best practice report. So any customer can upload their scrutinize to S3 and then get the report back via the email. And this scrutinize is a very useful tool that can help to do the health check and review all the best practice in a DIY fashion. It is a HTML-based file you can open from your browser, and you can check many aspects of the database and with the recommendation based from your own database's current configuration and values and logs. So that's very useful for you to see what is happening inside your database by yourself. But yeah, you can also use this scrutinizer to get the WeAdvisor in an automated fashion. So to know more about this WeAdvisor report and how you get one for your database, again, please attend the session which will be on air on tomorrow afternoon session by my colleague in this unified presentation. Okay, I think that's pretty much of it for me for today's presentation, and thank you very much. And back to you, Jeff.
Thank you, Ian, and thank you, Abby. Great presentation, and thank you for our attendees to listening to the presentation. We are now ready for Q&A. Thanks again, Abby. Thanks again, Ian. Great presentation. A lot of good resources there too, Ian, that our attendees can go and access for the Academy and otherwise. You bet. Yeah, so we got some questions that came in. Let's get going with them. Some really good ones here. Questions around resource management. So Ian or Abby, I don't know if this one goes to you or you guys can choose, but what are the Vertica Resource Manager limitations?
So one big limitation what I have found with couple of when compared to other databases is time-based management. So we do not have any kind of time-based resource management in Vertica. So I would say that's one limitation, and hopefully we get something in future on it.
Okay. Very good. Thanks, Abby. Another one, more of a future. We get this question a lot, particularly with stored procedures, our journey starting with Vertica 11. When will triggers be supported?
Personally, in all the migrations, I haven't, or even with my experience on database, I haven't found really a need to have triggers. Most of it is for auditing purpose, and I think we have pretty much good audit columns available with us. Of course, we do not capture the pre-updated or pre-deleted data, but if that is needed, we could, like I have presented, it could always be baked into your ETL layer into the procedures. If you are inserting into a particular table, do insert it into the audit or the trigger table.
Got it. Okay. Thanks, Abby. All right, let's look down the list here. We got a few others too. Question, Eon mode. Eon mode can be installed only on cloud providers platform? That's a question. Any way we can have Eon mode other than cloud providers such as AWS or Azure?
Let me take the question. That is basically possible, and customer can also install the Eon mode of Vertica database in their on-prem environment if, in case it is possible to provide the object storage as a communal storage for Vertica database. And we have numbers of customers who have Eon mode on Vertica in their on-prem environment as well right now. So yeah, I can definitely confirm that it is possible for you.
Sure, Ian, and just to pile on there for our attendees, Vertica Neon Mode supports a lot of those object storage partners, from Pure Storage, so sponsor, Dell EMC ECS, Scality, with the integration with
Minio.
HPE, Minio, exactly,
Yeah.
Apache, HDFS, and the
Yeah.
list goes on and on. So more to come there, but many of them are our sponsors. Please do look into them more as sponsors, particularly if you want those capabilities of a cloud optimized architecture within an on-prem or hybrid environment. Okay, got another one here. When will Postgres PLP GSQL be supported?
I'll take that, and I think it's a great news, especially for migration guys. We are supporting it from Vertica 11, though it would not be a kind of a full-blown procedure or SQL support like Oracle or Teradata, but you would still accomplish what is needed from that procedure. So Vertica 11 is the answer for this.
That is good news for sure. And for all the attendees, Vertica 11 was announced today. If you didn't catch the general session, you can go to vertica.com. Lots of information there.
Jeff, I would still like to add.
Sure.
Yeah, I would still like to add one point. Like, it would still need migration effort. It's not like you just copy and paste the PL SQL code from one to other.
That's a great point. Okay.
Yeah.
Good point. So feature out of the box, but you're going to need some migration support there. Okay.
That's right.
Good to set expectations. But you and I were talking about this a little bit. So this is maybe a little bit more of an observation too, with a lot of customers or just organizations that are migrating, from an enterprise data warehouse. Take for example, why on the final day do organizations tend to decide on the migration strategy? Why do they wait that long? Why do they put it off?
Like I said, you could be walking into a migration project where the architecture itself does not allow you to be in parallel production. Then whatever you design, let's say you choose the parallel production, but if the architecture is not allowing you, you just cannot do it. And then you've added this project as a delayed project, like for sure this is going to be red because the architecture is not supporting. So you definitely need to look deeper into the architectures, choose what is the best based on that. So if I choose as a big bang date, which works for all, big bang date works for all migration projects, because at any given day you could shut down the source and migrate everything, how much of our time it takes to Vertica. But parallel is something where it needs a well support from all the modules of the project. And if it does not, then it does not.
No, and you've seen it. You've seen many of these migrations where this has happened.
Oh yeah,
so
absolutely.
That's great advice.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Okay, I think we have time for one more question. Another Eon mode. Make this the last one. Adding a node to Eon mode seems to be flexible. Is it similarly easy or the same with enterprise mode?
Let me take that question. Yeah, adding and removing the node to and from the Eon enterprise mode of the Vertica is still possible, but as an aftermath, we need to prepare and perform the data rebalance across the entire Vertica cluster to evenly redistribute the data with the nodes in the cluster. So that's going to be the requirement for enterprise mode of the Vertica database to add or remove the node out from it.
Got it. So rebalancing. Okay,
Yep.
Good answer. Okay, that's all the time we have for questions, but you answered quite a few. I know that was beneficial to the attendees. And I want to thank our audience for great participation. If we weren't able to answer any questions that come in later on today, I will do our best to respond directly via email. And again, our engineers will be in the developer lounge right after the session, so you're definitely going to want to be able to take advantage of that. They'll also be available tomorrow afternoon and then Thursday morning. So please note that a replay of today's event and a PDF copy of the slides will be available on demand shortly. And of course, we invite you to share them with your colleagues. Again, thank you to our audience today. Don't forget to type the session code in the Analyze to Win section on the event navigation panel. Note that there'll be a short message from our sponsors that I'd encourage you to stick around and catch. Now, this concludes the breakout session. Have a great day, and we hope you enjoy Vertica Unified 21, and see you tomorrow.